Darren Curtis, The Awakened Parent Challenge, strengthening the connection with your teenager in just 7 days. This is episode 125 on Alternative Health Tools Podcast, where together we discover and share new alternative health tools and resources from alternative healthcare practitioners and experts.
I'm Lisa Victoria, your co-host from across the pond, and I'm joined with Kim Shea and John Beethan, who were over in America, my other co-hosts. Today, we are joined by the wonderful Darren Curtis, who's an accredited life coach, a youth coach, and author of the Awakened Parent Challenge. He works with schools and colleges and has done extensive work with the Global Youth Leadership Program founded charity by Tony Robbins. Really excited for this podcast today. I've read Darren's book that's just been launched, and basically what we're going to go through today in the podcast is how to become the awakened parent and how to enjoy better relationships with your children, yourself, and indeed others. And throughout the podcast, what we're going to focus on is what difference our focus makes in relationships and how we look at those. The use of hypnotic language in daily life. We're also going to look at whether we are the biggest critic or the biggest friend for our children and indeed ourselves. And also how to eliminate 80% of worry, arguments, and upsets in key relationships. So I know this is going to be packed full of great information, whether you've got children or not. There's going to be so many nuggets and wisdom coming from Darren today. So thank you so much, Darren, for joining us and gifting your time. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Lisa. I just dive straight in. Actually, I think it's always good to let people know how I got into all this, because if you knew my academic background, you'd think, how the heck have you written a book and how the hell have you become qualified to talk about this? I remember saying when I was at school, I liked three things about school, and that was playtime, dinner time, and home time. So I don't know if anybody can relate to that. That was my experience of school, which has actually put me in good stead, because a lot of the kids I work with in schools and colleges have got exactly the same outlook. So they don't necessarily enjoy it that much. I actually stumbled into this arena, if you like, because my wife suffered from really bad depression and anxiety, and even at times suicidal thoughts. So, I say that with a smile on my face now, because we've done so much research and we've kind of found the map, if you like. Although she gets some of those feelings now, she doesn't own them. They're not who she is. It's an absolute joy to come out the other end, to see the light at the end of the tunnel and come out the other end. But that's so, I suppose, the reason I share that with people is because for many years, I was the partner of somebody suffering from anxiety and depression, which can be very challenging itself. And obviously seeing my wife go through really chronic anxiety and this debilitating depression, when she's actually at a core, she's a very vivacious, lovely, lively person, and most people wouldn't have any idea that she even when she was suffering, because I think that's the key thing with people who suffer badly from depression and anxiety. On the day they're suffering, you don't really see them, or they just put a mask on. So it's just that's the grounding really of where I learned all of this, from a place of pain really, and a desire to help my wife. But actually now looking back, I wouldn't really change it for the world, because it really opened up a window for me to look at myself and my own stuff, So I was gladly sort of skimming along the surface of life, and it made me look a bit deeper at my own self and my own sort of stuff that was going on inside me. When on the surface I was happy-go-lucky, but actually, there's like most of us, there's I always say to people, that negative voice you've got inside your head, and everybody says, yeah, I know that voice. Well, I had one too, except actually bizarrely enough, mine was sort of very covert. So which can be quite dangerous because you don't actually know it until you realize it's, you somebody points out to you that it's there. So that's sort of a little, very brief whistle to stop sort of tour of where I've come from and how I've got here talking about this. And I suppose what I've done over the years, I just really found myself enjoying working with teenagers. I'd worked with, I'd worked in big business before, and I'd worked with senior managers and things like that, but I didn't really enjoy that. I felt it was a bit of a false world, and the way, the language of the corporate world just felt a bit alien to me. So whereas with teenagers, you really, they're real. So I really, really, really enjoyed working with them. And then I got the chance to volunteer at the Tony Robbins Global Youth Leadership Summits every year. It's really magical to see that unfold. And that's where the book came from, was after my first time of doing that. I remember sitting down after the event. I had a day before my plane was due to leave back to the UK. And I remember sitting down, scribbling notes about everything I'd learned that week. And I found myself crying next to this swimming pool. And just tears just falling out of my eyes. And it was like I'd realized the truth about that voice sort of inside our head. And I thought, I've got to get this information out to more parents because of the damage we unknowingly do to our children. With the best will in the world, we have expectations of them, and we have rules of how things should be and whatever. We inadvertently pass a lot of that on to them, become their internal voice inside their head. So that was where it all sort of came from. And that's where the Awakened Parent Challenge came from.
Thank you for sharing, Darren. I've got goosebumps just as you explain how it's all unraveled. And we set out on this journey of what's called life, and sometimes the twists and turns, and it's never part of our plan, but the bigger plan. And, those kind of insights and those moments, and be able to translate that into something really useful and want to help children, because it's like you said there, sometimes we unknowingly pass things on to others. I mean, I don't have children myself, but I've read your book, and certainly I could take things away, and thinking about friends with children and language that they use, which we're going to talk about today. It's all in that book, but this podcast isn't just for parents out there. They'll get huge amounts of benefit, but even if you haven't got children, it certainly will make you think about the use of language and how you feel about yourself and the relationships you have around you, including the relationship with yourself. So really, really excited to learn more from you. I know there's so much more magic on your journey, and we could talk for hours, couldn't we, in terms of all the tools you've got in your toolbox. But I think this podcast is going to be based around the Awakened Parent Challenge book that you've just released, because it's really, really important messages within that book. So when we think about how to become the awakened parent and have those better relationships, we talked about having a different focus and the impact that has on relationships. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Thank you. I do a lot with real life stories. That's kind of how I learn. And I think stories sort of stick with people. So, I remember being called into a mum was really worried about her daughter. It was her first day at secondary school. And she was literally sort of ready to be sick, worrying herself sick with the first day at school nerves, which is common. It's we all get nervous when it's the unknown, when we start a new job, a new relationship, first day at school. And so she called me and asked me if I could pop round and see her. This young girl, 11 years old, was sat there on her bed with her knees tucked up under her chin. And you could just see she was sort of like this very pale colour. And she looked like she was going to be sick. And so I said to her, how's it going? What are you worrying about? And she sort of said, well, I've got tomorrow at school, and I don't know. I haven't got a clue how big the school is. I'm not very good with directions, and I think I'm going to get lost. And I don't know what all the other kids are going to be like. Some of them might bully me. Some of the teachers might be mean. I'm quite a fussy eater, so I don't know, if I'm going to like what they serve me in the canteen or the cafe at the school. So she had this big list of things of what if this goes wrong, what if that goes wrong, what if I don't meet people, what if I get broken away from split up from my friend. So she had what if this and what if that. So she was, and I said to her, you seem to be worrying about this as if it's already happened. Your energy is like it's already happened. So I said, would you be prepared to play a little game with me and pretend that you're speaking to me now as if you've been to school today and actually it went so perfectly that you can't believe how lucky you are. So, and she was great. She said, well, yeah, I don't mind. So I said, while you're talking to me, can you talk to me, as if it's already happened? So she said, well, I got up early so I could sort of do my hair and make sure all my uniform looked nice. I met my friend on the way to school. Mum and dad stayed off work. Mum and dad stayed off work so they could be with me in the morning to support me. And I'm like, yeah, great. And she said, I met my friend on the way to school. We got there early in plenty of time. And the teachers were really nice. They introduced us to the school and they gave us a map of the school so we knew where we were going. She said all of my classmates were brilliant. I couldn't wish for a better class. It was just a nice, calm, friendly day. All the teachers were nice, and even the other kids, when they bumped into us, they'd show us different things and joke around with us. And she said it was just a really nice day. Oh, and the food was really good too. The food was stuff that I liked. So from that you can already get a picture of what her sort of key values are in life. She wants support. She wants to, have a little bit of fun and enjoyment. She wants to be connected to her friend and things like that. So you already start to build a picture of what makes her tick, if you like. But rather than all that stuff she was worried about before, which was basically focusing on everything she didn't want, which was manifesting as a feeling inside of her. It was a bad feeling. So we always talk about getting hijacked by your script, which is that little negative voice inside your head. And so that's what was happening to her. She was being hijacked by her script. And then she still went on to say, after she told me all the good stuff, she said, yeah, but it might not happen like that. And I said, no. I said, it might not happen like that. I said, but which one makes you feel better? Does it make you feel better thinking about the day, how good it could be? Or does it make you feel good thinking about the day, how bad it could be? And I said, because the chances are, 95% of the stuff we worry about just never even happens. And it certainly never happens as bad as we think it does. But yet our focus, or our script's focus, will always go down that avenue. And it's trying to keep us safe. It's trying to think of all the eventualities, but it's crazy because it doesn't feel good. So, and the same from a parent's point of view. Often a parent will focus on something. They'll be saying what they don't want a lot of. They'll say, don't speak to me like that, or, don't spill that drink. They give them a drink and say, don't spill it. When you think, well, is that what you want or what you don't want? And the thing I'm saying about that, if I say to you today, don't think of a pink cat, your mind has to build a picture of the pink cat to not think about it. So, if you wouldn't, I don't think anybody would have thought of a pink cat today unless I just told them not to think about it. So the bizarre thing is, the very thing I want them not to do, they're doing. So, and it's the same with our relationships. My wife made me laugh the first time she ever learned this many, many years ago when we were doing our life coach training. The lady who was teaching us, she said, look, men are very simple creatures. They how did she word it? She just said, they rely on praise, and they'll do whatever you praise, they'll do more of, because they don't necessarily know what you want, because you're always telling them what you don't want. And what my wife, like many, partners, it's not just wives here, it's husbands as well, get it completely wrong. She used to moan about the fact that the bin wasn't being put out. It'd be overflowing, before it got put into the big wheelie bin out the front. And so this one day, without me knowing about it, after we just finished our training, she said, she said, oh, can you take the bin out for me, please? So I took the bin out, and she went, she goes, that is such a great help. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And she actually thought, when she was saying it, he's going to realize what I'm doing here, because I'm being so over the top. She shared with me years later, she said, you know what, after I said what I wanted, which was for you to put the bin out, something so simple, and I praised you for doing it, I never, ever had to ask you to do it again, because my little monkey brain realizes I know how to please my wife. I put the bin out. That's one of my tasks. But it's really funny because I hear so often when I'm in people's homes, I'll hear one partner saying to the other one, "Oh, that's right. Don't do this, or you never put the bin out, or da 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 da." So that little brain doesn't know it, even though the end result is the same. They want the bin to go out. It's a bit like the tidying the kids' rooms. I hear parents all the time shouting and screaming and about kids tidying their rooms, but what they'll do is say, you treat this house like a hotel. You treat your room looks like a pigsty. They very rarely say, "I'd really, really appreciate you or appreciate it if you tidy your room." Now, I know that's not always going to work straight away, but the fact is, most of the time we're telling our kids what we don't want. That's what we'll end up getting.
So many examples there and so many golden nuggets. Thank you for sharing, Darren, because you've talked there about using the story of the young girl first day at school. I mean, everybody has a first day at school, right? So everybody can relate to that. I can relate to my first day at school, and whether you're a parent or not, it could be a first day at work, couldn't it, in the job? It's those thoughts and those feelings, and actually which one would you choose to focus on? And then I think, when you were talking about Tracy and the use of the language and putting the bin out, it's so transferable into relationships, not just with children. It's like with anything, isn't it? And what you focus on. And the brain doesn't recognize the word don't. So actually, when you say don't spill that drink, you're saying spill that drink, aren't you? And you have referenced that in your book, haven't you? And don't think of a pink cat. And that's what our brains do. And it like you said right at the beginning of the podcast, we don't know sometimes the kind of not damage that we're doing, but the hindering of relationships that we're imposing by the use of our language. And this Awakened Parent Challenge and the Awakened Parent podcast is just wonderful because it's getting people to think about what language are they going to be using going forwards and what they want to focus on. What outcome do they want rather than what they don't want.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, another just good example, just to finish off on that as well. I was sharing the other day with a friend the fact that my son during lockdown, he's 22 now, and he's just learned how to cook, but really, really well, cook everything from scratch. And it's fantastic. It's certainly helped me lose lots of weight. And then the first thing she said was, "Oh, and what about the washing up?" And I said, "Well, I do that." And so she went, "What, he leaves it?" And I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Because he's doing all the cooking. So I'm more than happy to do the washing up." And I said, "Hold on a minute. Are you telling me if your son did all of the cooking for a whole week, your focus would go on to the fact he hadn't done the washing up?" And she just sort of went quiet and she went, "Yeah, it probably would actually." She said, "Because in my world, those two things go together." Of course, this comes back to the script. So somebody at some stage has said to her, "If you do the cooking, you need to tidy up after yourself." Whereas in my hallucination, I am so happy that he's done the cooking and saved myself and my wife from having to cook that it's fantastic. I mean, and I mean, it's crazy because we've got dishwasher, so it's hardly like old fashioned washing up either. So, but the fact is we love to wash up because we've just had this fabulous meal. So, but I thought, God, couldn't that be so different in a different household? Would that son or daughter still want to cook a meal if all the focus is, "Oh, you haven't done the washing up"? And
it comes back to that word focus again, doesn't it? I'm praising people for what they do rather than moaning at what they don't do. And then you'll get more of it. It's the law of attraction, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But it's a small thing, but it's a massive thing. So it's just a matter of just catching yourself if you're focusing on the things you don't want. Just try and think about what you do want, and the difference is amazing. It really is.
We talked a little bit about language there, didn't we, in terms of kind of, "Oh, thank you for putting the bin out," and that's kind of the praise. And so when we move on to the use of hypnotic language in daily life, what do you mean by that, and how can people start implementing that?
Yeah. I mean, advertisers spend billions of pounds every year using hypnotic language patterns. It's what they would term as ethical hypnosis. That's what it basically is. If you notice, what they actually do is use a feeling. So if you'll see an advert And you won't actually know what the advert's about often until right at the end, because what they've done is they've spent the 30 seconds building an emotion in you, and then they'll just flash the brand in the last 3-5 seconds, because they've got you to the emotional state they want you to be in, and then they flash the brand. That's a form of hypnosis. We're using a form of hypnosis all the time with our words and how we act. So sometimes we haven't even got to use the word, but how we act each day tells our children what's important to us. So if you come home and, read the paper, or you come home and check your emails, that tells your children that or your partner, if you haven't got children, that the things that you're engaging in are more important to them than they could say, "Oh no, I love you. You're the most important thing in the world." But if your actions show that you're reading your emails, or reading the paper or whatever, it shows to them in their mind, in their script. It will say to them, "Oh, that's more important." I was trying to think of the guy's name, but a brilliant book. It'll come to me. But he shares a thing about when. What was that? I'll come back to it. I've just lost that. I often do that. But it's fantastic because, again, knowing about the little voice inside your head, my little voice would normally be going mad now, because obviously I do a professional podcast, but hey ho, this is real life. People forget things, so and that's fine. But no, hypnotic language patterns. I remember working with a young lad. I've changed all the names in the book. It's not the normal names of people, but we'll call him Carlos for the sake of this argument. His stepmom called me in because she said he just doesn't communicate with me. He just almost ignores me every day. And I've been his stepmom for 2 years now. So she said, "Can you come in and sort of just see if you can help us really as a family?" She said, because his dad's getting to the end of his tether as well, and it's causing a lot of arguments in our house. She said, I don't want my partner to argue with his son or anything. She said, but it is quite hard when somebody's ignoring you in your own home. And so Carlos was I think he was about 14, 15 years old. So I got talking to him, and he was just saying that he said, I do. I find it hard to talk to my stepmom. He goes, "We've got nothing in common." So that's a hypnotic language pattern, because of course, if you're beginning anything with the word I, you're owning it as your identity. So, and I said, okay, let's play a little game. Let's pretend that you don't find it hard. So if you didn't find it hard to talk to her, what would you be telling me? And he said, "Well, I guess I'd be telling you I find it easy to talk to my stepmom." And he straight away went, "But I don't." So I went, no. I said, "But let's play the game." So I said, "So you would tell yourself that I find it easy to talk to my stepmom?" He said, "Yeah." So, and I said, "Just out of interest, if you did find it easy to talk to your stepmom, what would be different? What would you do differently?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I guess, she's really academic. So I guess I'd ask her more questions about my homework, because that would be really helpful." And he said, "I guess I'd spend a little bit more time downstairs with the family rather than in my room." He said, "Because it wouldn't be as awkward." He said, I guess I might invite them or suggest as a family we go to the cinema, because, he said, hey ho, he said, "You haven't actually got to talk that much." He said, "But you're still going out as a family." He said, "So that's pretty cool." And I said, "Oh, that's good." Yeah, so I said, "Okay." I said, "Right." I said, "But the important thing is," and he had loads of, he reeled off about 10, 15 different things if he found it easy to talk to his stepmom. Because this is the thing as well. If you've already hypnotized yourself or somebody else in a certain way, they will go and gather evidence, or their script will, or they'll just gather evidence to support that belief about it. I find it hard to talk to my stepmom. So that becomes their reality. I said to Carlos, "Right, we've got to somehow get past the gatekeeper of your mind and get you to lock into this new mantra of yours of I find it easy to talk to my stepmom." And so I said, "What do you do often?" So he said, "Well, I check my phone, I check my texts." I said, "Okay, cool." So I said, "Could you, every time you check a text in the day," I said, "Do you do it sort of more than 10, 12 times a day?" He said, "Oh yeah, easily, 20, 30 times a day." He said, "Yeah, I'll do that. Every time I check my text, I'll remember to say," so that became his anchor. So I remember to say, I find it easy to chat with my stepmom. And he laughed. He said, "But I don't." And I said, No. I said, "No." And I said, "I really respect that you're going along with this. This is the other reason I love working with teenagers, because they actually just do things rather than try and be all sort of adult about it and go, 'Oh no, I don't really think I'll do it. I'll feel silly doing this.'" So the next week, I I went back and the mum answered the door, and it was wonderful to see her. She had this big beaming face, and she went, "What have you done to Carlos?" And I said, "Hold it there. Let me talk to him." And I said, "You tell me your story in a minute. I want to talk to him for half an hour." So I went into the lounge again and chatted with him, and he had a big beam on his face as well. And I said, "What's happened this week then?" He said, "Well," he said, "to be honest," he said, "I asked my mum, he's my stepmum, if she could help me with my homework." And he goes, "She was absolutely over the moon, to help me." And he said, "My God, it makes it so much easier when you've got somebody intelligent helping you." He said, "My dad's terrible, it'd be like my kids asking me to do the homework with them." And he said, I did. And he said, what was funny was, he said, "I did what you told me to. I invited them to the cinema." And I said, "I didn't tell you to do that." I said, "You suggested that if you found it easy to talk to your stepmom, you would." He said, "Really?" And that's what happens, you see. So he said, "Did I come up with that?" And I said, "Yeah, that was one of your ideas." I said, "Everything was your idea." So he said, "Oh, right." So, and he said, "Yeah, I said about going to the cinema." And he said, he said it was just great. And his stepsister went with them as well. And that was he said, that was just great. And he said, and we said, "Why don't we go out for a meal afterwards?" And he said, so we sat down for a meal and talked about what we just watched at the cinema. And he said, then we suggested a few films to watch at home as well, because that seemed to work really well as a family. And he mentioned a few other things as well, but you could just tell he was just really alive. And this was in the space of a week. And I said, "So how did you get on with your thing, saying to yourself about, I find it easy to talk to my stepmom?" And he said, "Well, every time I said it made me laugh." And he said, "Because I kind of felt like I was lying to myself." And I said, "Well, you kind of were in the beginning." And he said, "Well, what I did was," he said, "I found it easier in the morning looking at myself in the mirror as I brushed my teeth." He said, "I would say it to myself, first thing in the morning when I got up, and I would say it last thing at night as well." And he said, actually, he found that more powerful. He said, "Because I'm looking at myself in the mirror," and he said, "and I'm laughing at myself saying it, because," he said, "I know that I'm sort of kidding myself." But he said, "But I did it because you asked me to do it, so I just went along with it." I said, why do you think you ended up doing all those things with your stepmom then?" And he just laughed, and he said, "Well, I suppose I just find it easy to talk to her." So I said, "Oh, that's really cool." So, within a week, he'd managed to erase the old belief, which was causing him all those problems, and give himself a new hypnotic language, and basically change his actions as a result of changing his sort of identity around his relationship with his stepmom. And if you knew the history of the family and what had happened before that, and the fact that his little brother lives in a different country and the mum lives in a different country, the real mum lives in a different country, you would, if you tried to get down into all of that sort of like, therapy that you think he might need to undo all of that, you might be there for an awfully long time. But for my remit of basically just getting the family to a bit closer, those 2 sessions, and I think we had another 2 sessions, and the job was done, really, because he wanted to do some other stuff then. It wasn't about his stepmom, because he was already doing that. I think he wanted to ask a girl out or something like that. So the other 2 sessions were all about his relationships with other girls, which, again, if he's got a dodgy relationship with his mum and with his stepmom, what do you think his relationships are going to be like with somebody going forward? So just by nipping it in the bud at age 14, 15, it really, really helped him, hopefully for the rest of his life.
It's breaking that chain, isn't it? It's like stopping that from repeating itself, like you say, through other relationships as well, because now we're more conscious of the hypnotic language. And what I love about what you've said about the hypnotic language, it's not like you need to be hypnotized. It's just about consciously thinking about your language, isn't it? And then subconsciously it's going in. And that's why it's that hypnotic language, because it's changing the way you think and feel about situations, which automatically your brain goes looking for the solutions, doesn't it? Like what you said is, you will find all the reasons why you can do something, or all the reasons why you can't do something. So even if you're stood in the mirror and you feel like you're lying to yourself, you are creating your way of thinking, which has that ripple effect.
Yeah, it's just a nice new pathway you're carving, rather than the default old pathway that you've been going through for years, sort of thing. So yeah, that's what I like it sort of when just people put things into practice and it actually works. And I have to do this with myself all the time as well. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. So I need to remind myself about my language, and it's something you need to do to the day you die, really, because we've all got that negative voice in our head, even when you know it's there, it still crops up and hijacks you from time to time. So it's being aware of it. But my God, I'm so much happier knowing it's there now, and because you can actually do something about it. I think that's the sad thing. When you don't know it's there, or you're not awakened or conscious to it, then all sorts of things are going on unconsciously, which can be so dangerous for, I think, most relationships that split up. It's totally unconscious. You're not arguing. I mean, like a therapist would say, I remember my friend went to a sort of marriage guidance, and they'd had a massive argument about a cup of coffee, and the therapist said, it's not about the cup, don't you? It's not about the coffee. And it was like, yeah, it's not. That argument was something way back, maybe not even in this relationship, the one previously, or the two before that, or whatever. So it's so good to be conscious and awake, rather than sleepwalking your way through life.
I think that's a great analogy, sleepwalking your way through life. And when you talk about, just for the benefit of our listeners, when you talk about the script, and we both coach and we're aware of it, just for the benefit of the listeners, the script is the negative voice in the head the script as in being, the words, the thoughts that we would read from, and it will give us the answers in any given situation if we don't choose. And that's exactly what Darren's talking about here, is becoming conscious, becoming aware. Then we can not value that opinion of the script that we call the negative voice inside our head. And that's where we can then choose that different positive language, and that hypnotic language that we're talking about, which is what exactly in the example you got Carlos to do, standing in the mirror. That just waking up, isn't it? And waking up and helping any relationship in your life.
And I think the script has always been a great analogy for me. I mean, years ago, I just used to call it the gremlin or the negative voice inside your head or whatever. But I think the script works better because you are literally often playing a part, like an actor reading from a script, and the script has been passed down from generations to generations. So if your family's got a script about money, chances are you'll have a script about money. My family have obviously got a script about money. That's why it jumps out to me with a big red button on it, But about
people
weight,
think or weight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't. What do they say? Don't wash your dirty linen in public. So don't make sure people don't know. People don't find out about this sort of thing.
You've got a reputation to uphold.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Struggling.
Yeah. Yeah, and different countries have got different scripts as well. In especially in the East, it can be very proud sometimes, can't it? You've brought shame upon the family and things like that. So, but it's just a script.
Love the analogy of the male kind of script, as we call it, the negative voice. If you compare it to somewhere like one of our European countries, like Italy, where men they'll hug each other, won't they, and each other to greet each other, whereas in the UK it's very kind of more of a stiff upper lip and you shake hands at best. But you certainly don't hug another man unless you really, really know them very well. And that is just something, when you talk about, sleepwalking, why wouldn't you choose to hug another man? And would you choose to hug another man? And that's what's wonderful about becoming awake, isn't it? And tips that we've already gone through. I mean, this is wonderful, and we're just picking little bits out of your book and your program that you do online. So this is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure our listeners are getting huge amounts of value out of it. And I think the next thing we were going to talk about was whether you're your child's biggest critic or biggest friend, and that can be related to ourselves as well, can't it? Talking about
it can, yeah. So it does go. Dovetails exactly on what we've just been talking about, and I think teenagers as well. I think teenagers hold up a mirror to us. I mean, I've got two boys who have both gone through the teenage years now, and they really do hold up a mirror. So because they press your buttons a lot, and it shows you what's going on inside of you, really. So if you can look at them as being your biggest teachers instead of coming along to ruin your life, as many people see it, then it changes the whole dynamic of the relationship. And the thing with this, when I go on a lot in the book of either being script FM, which is basically critic FM, or is it friend FM? And it's like if you were listening to a radio station, you just jumped in your car or something, and there's a radio station that you just don't resonate with. It doesn't just doesn't do it for you, or it even annoys you. You know, it's you would just you'd either turn it off or you'd change the station to a different radio station, wouldn't you? Well, it's the same with that negative voice inside our head. I call the real negative voice Script FM, and I call the nice, nurturing, parenting voice Friend FM. Now, I know not everybody has got a nice, nurturing parent voice, because sometimes the parental voice is the script, it is the critic FM. So that's what I was getting at here, is when you're talking to your child or asking them to do things or criticizing them. I mean, because I'm not saying it's all a bed of roses and you can't tell your kids off. By all means, you know, tell them off. But I always say about sort of making sure you discipline the behavior. You don't sort of criticize their identity. So often, you know, when we get hijacked by our script and we get annoyed and angry and frustrated, we'll often say things we don't mean. So you might find yourself going, "Oh, you're so stupid," or, you know, "You've got the brains of a rocking horse," or you know, it's all, anything that starts with you becomes their I. So inside their head, if you tell a kid you're stupid, it doesn't take them very long at all before they say inside their head, their internal dialogue is, "Oh, I'm stupid. Oh, you know me, I'm stupid. Oh, you know me, I'm useless. Oh, you know me, I'm worthless." I mean, when people say they've got limited self-worth, that's come from somewhere and someone. Now, I'm not saying it's all parents. It's parents, it's teachers, it's friends or bullies. It's any caregiver, but especially in the early days, the earlier it sort of gets said to them, then the more likely it is to go in. But yeah, so that's the main thing is just think about when it's hard, because when you're hijacked by your script, you do say things you regret. I still say things I regret now. But what's good about being aware, I suppose, is you can quickly backtrack and you can say sorry a lot quicker. Because I had a script that said, you know, saying sorry was a weakness, that being stubborn was actually an asset. Whereas, you know, people who are stubborn, especially parents, usually what happens is they lose all communication with their children. You hear so many stories about children not speaking to their parents. And that's because, funny enough, the parent was stubborn. So what have they done? They've passed on their stubborn script to their son or daughter. And guess what? 2 stubborn scripts means you don't talk anymore, or you don't talk until something horrible happens, like either one of them dies, and then you wish you'd have spoken to them, or one of them gets critically ill or maybe terminally ill. And all of a sudden they realize that maybe that was not the right thing to do. And they'd really love to speak to their child, or the child would love to speak to the parent. So it's trying to sort of, a really good technique I learned years ago from Tony Robbins was, he said about the words always and never. So he said, often when you're just about to argue, you're just about to enter into that argument, so therefore get hijacked by your script. If you notice, what the script does, it will try and make it so that you'll say, you always do this, or you never do that. Whereas it's not true, because they don't always do this and they don't never do that. So if you try swapping those words out, because they're real trigger words, because the script almost needs them to make you say the rest of the sentence, which is going to be pretty vile, basically. I mean, I don't know what you're like when you argue, Lisa, but I'm awful when I argue. If anybody ever filmed me being arguing, I would be very embarrassed. But I realise that's one of my things that I've worked on over the years. So always and never, if you can change the words always and never to sometimes, because sometimes is actually the truth. So if you can catch yourself when you're just about to argue and say, you sometimes do this, and it takes all of the power away. Because again, what do? We point, we go to point at people, as if to point the point home to them. So yeah, you always do this, you never do that, but you sometimes do this, or you sometimes do that. It just takes all of the power out of it, and it actually makes you laugh, because you've got these key words that make you angry. So if you can change the word, then all of a sudden you take all of the power out of it.
That's a shift in energy there, isn't there? Because never to sometimes, it kind of devalues it a little bit and take, like you say, that kind of power out of it. And I'm just picking up on something you said earlier, because I think it's a really pertinent point. It's when we talk to people and you say your yous become their I's. So you are stupid, or you are a fool, or whatever it is, it becomes their I am. And as we know, behavior follows identity. So if that becomes their identity, they're going to start behaving like that. So in that instance, if there's any parents out there who are thinking, well, what would I say instead? Because we're saying we're not going to attack their identity. We're going to challenge their behavior because, I guess as part of being a parent, I don't have children, but as observing and listening to friends and yourself, there's going to be times when you perhaps need to direct and educate a child because it's part of growing up and learning, isn't it? So how would you in that instance work on helping them change their behavior rather than criticizing their identity?
So often, I mean, even if, because when you take away the you, so therefore you're not attacking their identity. So you can still virtually say the same thing, but what you're doing is you're I mean, it's better not to do it at all, to change it, but I'll go on to that. But if you were saying that they were irresponsible or they were stupid, what you would say is that was stupid. So you go, that was such a stupid thing to do, but you're not saying you're stupid. And or if you're saying, I don't know, they're irresponsible, you wouldn't say they're irresponsible. You'd say, can you see that that's such an irresponsible thing to have done? And it's almost to try and bring them in. And it does take practice, because of course what usually happens, and what I do with this is if I can feel that I'm starting to move away from saying something with love, and I've started to be hijacked by my script, I desperately try not to say anything at all. And I just wait a few minutes and calm down. Even if you can just count to 10. And then just before you go into that, because often if you're hijacked by your script, all bets are off, and you do launch into that sort of you this, you that language. But if you can come at it from a place of love and say to them, what can we? So how are we going to resolve this? My default is I say, listen, guys, we're a team. So can we just calm things down a minute? If they're going off on the deep end, or if they're, just being totally unreasonable, because again, what happens is, and remember, they're not, as a teenager in this instance, their brain isn't fully developed, and they are being unreasonable, but not deliberately, not to annoy you. They're just literally not developed. But what happens is rather than our adult kick in, it brings it down to what used to be our teenager. So that's sort of our inner child arguing with them as a child, albeit a young adult, but still a child, really. It's just sort of saying, getting that key, trying to practice some key things. So my go-to is, come on, guys, we're a team. Let's act like it. So if I want things done in the house, I'll be saying, so everything's a mess, whatever. Then I'll say, right, guys, we're a team. So who's going to do the washing up? Who's going to empty the dishwasher? Who's going to fill the dishwasher? Who's going to do whatever? Pick up the dog poo in the garden or whatever. And the presupposition is there, one of us is going to do one of those tasks. So there's a presupposition without being sarcastic. But again, it's a really useful hypnotic language pattern tool, because you're presupposing, like for younger children, you can go, do you want us to read your book before or after we have the bath? So the presupposition is you're going to have a bath. Now, the great thing by saying that is they have the illusion of choice. So they're saying, before. So they're really happy to have a bath now, because they think they're in control by saying, I'd like to read the book before the bath. So you go, okay, cool. So come on then, let's go and have the bath. But so it's just a tip
for anyone.
Yeah,
there's a lot of parents out there who struggle to either get
it is so
bed or into the bath. Yeah. So that's a great tip to use.
Yeah. Oh, so, yeah. Do you want to have the book? Yeah. I suppose you can't have the book before or after bed, because if you're in bed, before or after you go to sleep. But
book on the sofa before you go to bed,
or in bed. Yeah. And all of a sudden they're scrambling upstairs to go into bed. Yeah. So, but at least it's just giving them a little bit of choice, because again, going back to the scripty voice or the friend voice inside your head is to, what you want is you want them to have a voice that says, I'm okay and it'll be okay. A voice a voice of a friend, because then it's so much easier because you're not always going to be around, are you? And you don't always want to be around because you want them to be independent. You want them to be confident in their own right. So from a really early stage in my kids' lives, and again, I'm so glad that I learned all this stuff early on, because it made me change the way that I parented, because I would have probably been a lot more protective, and I would have probably taken over, because I feel that I'm fairly confident. So I would have probably done things for them a lot more. But by being mindful and thinking of the long game, I used to say, let's say we went to a restaurant or a cafe, I would always say to my kids from as young as I can remember, 3 years old or whatever, I'd say to them, right, could you tell the nice lady or the nice man what you want to eat? Rather than me choose for them, I would get an idea of what they wanted first, but I'd say, can you tell the man what you want? And so it got them talking to adults at a very early age. If maybe we ordered something that didn't work, a toy that didn't work, we'd go back to the shop. This was in the days before Amazon, when you just send it back. But we would go to the shop together, and I would get them to talk to the lady or the man at the counter and take the toy back and tell them what was wrong with it. So not force them. So, because if they had a shy day, that was fine. You haven't, and again, I wouldn't have chastised them if they didn't want to do it, but I used to encourage them, knowing that I wanted that. I was conscious that I wanted them to have that nice parent voice inside their head when something goes wrong later in life, so that they could almost hear my voice or an adult voice in their head go, it'll be okay. Whatever happens, even if they don't give you a new toy, that's okay. But if they do give you a new toy, that's okay too.
And it's having that experience dealing with it, isn't it? And like you say, their biggest friend. So they're, having their friend voice talk to them and say it's going to be okay, rather than, oh, this is broken, this is terrible, now we've got a problem to fix. It's like, come on, we can go and do this. So you're committing.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, I've got your back sort of thing.
Yeah, I love that. So yeah, I guess just to wrap up on that point, it's becoming their biggest friend, isn't it, rather than their biggest critic. And back to what we said earlier, is you can absolutely become your best friend too, and rather than your biggest critic, because often we berate ourselves, don't we? It's not about how we talk to others, it's about how we talk to ourselves.
Yeah, and just remembering for people to remember that if they have got that critical voice in their head, that's actually not their voice. Nobody talks, negatively to themselves, but it's somebody else's voice. So if you're aware that nobody would choose to talk to themselves or criticize themselves, but the script will always talk to you horribly. But so when you're choosing, you would always choose that nice voice. And some days, if you can't choose, the script wins, and that's just the way it is. And again, that's okay too. So we're not telling people to be upbeat all the time, because that's not realistic. We're just saying that if you can consciously choose, you would always choose to have a friendly voice inside your head. But on occasions, the script's going to hijack you, and that's fine too. So but when the time comes, you can be kind to yourself again.
And that's exactly what we're talking about, isn't it? The awaken challenge. Just become more awake. That's the challenge in life, isn't it? Is to become more awake.
It is. Yeah, definitely. It makes life so much niceful and more peaceful. Yeah. And the other, So, and then the other thing we were going to talk about in a minute was the 80-20, wasn't it? The sort of how to get rid of, was it 80% of your, I can't remember what I wrote. You read it out for me, Lisa.
So how we eliminate 80% of worry, arguments and upsets in key relationships. And we said we were going to circle back to don't be home late.
Yeah, the example in the book, which was the story I'd sort of linked to that. And all it was I remember seeing this lady. She called me in because her daughter would often stay out with the wrong crowd, but the key thing being she'd always be home late. Her time to come home was 10 o'clock at night, and she would roll in at 11, at 12, sometimes later than that. So you can imagine, as a parent of a young girl, a young teenage girl, we're talking a 14-year-old girl here. So which at the time I thought, this is a long time ago, and so I don't want to show my age, but I was thinking, a 14-year-old girl out at 10 o'clock at night, it could be a bit sort of scary, but maybe, yeah. I've only had boys myself, but I've coached lots of girls. But it was interesting that, so when we said to her, because she was literally moaning about everything, she was moaning about the state of this girl's room. She was moaning about the fact she got home late. She was moaning that she fallen in with the wrong crowd. She was moaning that she was behind on her schoolwork. And so I said, right, I've got to stop you there. You know, I'm going to have this was sort of like the pre-intake session, if you like, to find out what the problem was. So I said, if you could get rid of one of these, she called them battles. So, you know, I said, okay, we'll call them battles. I don't like calling them battles, but we will for the sake of, I wanted to use her language. And so you've got all these battles, and it sounds like you're chastising your daughter or talking in the same way about all of them. It doesn't matter if she's using the wrong knife or fork or not washing up. That's the same. She's getting the same amount of verbal abuse as she is if she gets home at 12 o'clock at night. And I said, but obviously, you know, not doing the washing up isn't as bad, presumably, as coming home at 1 o'clock in the morning. So she went, oh, no, of course it's not. And I said, but I can hear from your voice that it seems to annoy you as much because presumably everything's stacked. You know, she's so stacked with emotion because her daughter's not doing all these different things in her life that it's upsetting her to the same degree all the time. So I said, if we could just win one battle, what battle would make the most difference? So she said, well, the coming home late battle, you know, the coming home after 10 o'clock battle. So I said, okay. So I said, so what do you actually want? She goes, well, I don't want her to come home late. And I said, no, that's what you don't want. So that goes back to what we were saying earlier about the hypnotic language patterns. So, and she looked at me really puzzled. And this often happens because we're so used to talking in that certain way. She goes, I don't know what you mean. She goes, I don't want her to come home late. That's what I want. I said, no, that's what you don't want. So I said, if she didn't come home late, what would that be? So she goes, well, I suppose I want her to come in before 10 o'clock. And I said, right. So what you want her to do is to come home before 10 o'clock. And I said, which is what you want, not what you don't want. So, and I said, what, just out of interest, why do you want that? So she said, well, her father and I love her very much and we worry about her. And it just means we'd be able to get to bed at a decent time and go to sleep, you know, and relax. So I said, okay, next time she goes out the door, rather than go on about what you usually say, what she told me is what she said, you treat this house like a hotel, your room's a pigsty, you're never home on time. She's actually telling her, you're never home on time. So even if the poor girl wanted to get home on time, she's got this voice in her head that says, well, I'm always late. I never get home on time. So she probably finds she'll miss the bus by 2 minutes or something like that, even with the best intentions in the world. So anyway, so I said, right, what you've just told me there, can you please tell your daughter the next time she goes out the door and say it with sincerity, like you've just told me, not sarcastically. So she sort of said, I'm going to have to write this down because she goes, it's just not how I talk. So I said, well, please, however you're going to do it, just please, you know. So she said, okay. She actually that was on the Friday. So she tried it that night. And she rung me the next morning and she just went, it can't be that easy. So I said, okay, talk me through what's happened. She said, well, I literally, as she was leaving, she said, I calmed myself down and I said exactly what we discussed. I said, just remember, you know, your father and I love you very much. And we'd love it if you could come home before 10 o'clock. That means your father and I can get to bed early and we can relax. So have a good evening, enjoy yourself, and we'll see you before 10. And I said, and what happened? She said, she strolled in at 9:45, not 10, 9:45. She said, that has not happened for like 2 years. So, and I said, but this is it. I said, because for the past 2 years, because you didn't know any better, you haven't been telling her what you wanted. You've done what most parents do, and you've told her what you didn't want. And she'd given you it. Bizarrely enough, she'd given you the lateness that you kept going on about, even though it started with the word don't. But don't think of a pink cat. There's your big pink cat. So so that was awesome to hear that. But the thing was as well, she shared with me. She said that one thing has literally got rid of 80% of our arguments in our house. She said because she said I can tolerate, you know, her room being upside down. She goes, we've just come to an agreement, which is what I did with my son. One of my sons, his room was ridiculously upside down. I mean, I don't pretend to be the neatest person in the world, but we came to an agreement early on because we found that was what most of our arguments were about. So he said, well, look, it's my room. So he said, if I just have my room how I want it to be, and if you just agree that, once I shut the door, that don't worry about it. And I said, no, okay, cool. I said, so if you can make sure the rest of the house is reasonable, you haven't got your stuff spilling out into the other rooms. I said, I'll just accept that your room is what your room is. And because it's, at the end of the day, it's his space in our home, isn't it? In the family home. So that instantly stopped like 80% of our arguments, because that's what we used to argue about all the time, was his room being upside down, which I'd imagine I hear a lot of parents going on about their teenager's room. And what it is, again, it's because our script says, I don't know if it's going to be about what are other people going to think if they come round, or is it that they've got their mum's voice or dad's voice in their head, that's sort of like, it seems that their child is getting away with something if it's, or did they get moaned at, or are they naturally very organized people? And so when they've got this creative child the creative brain is very, very scruffy and very, very sort of like not organized. It's very hard for an organized brain, a parent's brain, to understand how anybody can be like that. But again, it's understanding there are different personality types, and it's honoring those different personality types, because, often I've said to parents, okay, so your son's not that academic, which is causing a lot of arguments in your house, but you've just told me that they make friends really easily. They can pick up any instrument and play it straight away. I mean, that in itself is phenomenal. Or they can do all physical sports. So they've got this physical intelligence, and they've got this musical intelligence, and they've got this personal intelligence or interpersonal intelligence. So those are their skills. They're obviously more right-brained person. They're never going to remember stats, and they're never going to remember facts to pass exams. So they're always going to be a kind of C grade student. So there's really no point putting all the value or putting all your conditional love into them getting A grades, because it just ain't going to happen. That's not who they are. So if you love them because they can, love them unconditionally anyway, but get them more music lessons. If they're good at music, give them more music lessons. If they're good at swimming, get them more swimming lessons.
And so focus again, doesn't it? It's focusing on what they don't want to happen. They don't want them to fail their exams, rather than what they do want. They want them to thrive. What parent out there, even a non-parent, what parent out there doesn't want their child to be happy and thrive? And ultimately that's what, quite often when I'm coaching, is the pressure's coming from a place of love, because they want their child to be happy and successful. But actually, success and happiness can come in many, many forms, can't it? It's not just the one route, which is the academic route taught through school. And it comes back to that focus, doesn't it, again? And I love your examples there as how to eliminate, those worries and arguments and upsets. And it's just that flipping it around, isn't it, and saying, well, actually, what's going on for me? Is it my issue that their room's untidy and it's bothering me? So what is it that I need to let go of? And it's that self-reflection as well, isn't it? I just love it. Thank you so much for all the tips. It's been amazing. I just think if we're going to leave our listeners with kind of a parting thought, what would that be?
I think one piece of advice I do give a lot of parents I work with is, the more rules you've got in life, which usually it's the script's rules, not even your own rules. So once you become aware of where those rules have come from, but if you've got 50, 60 rules, about how things should be, likelihood is you're going to spend a lot of time arguing. It doesn't necessarily say those rules are the right rules either. And often putting more rules in place isn't good for certain children. So yeah, it's good to have structure, and it's good to have guidelines, but keep things flexible, because the more flexible you can be, and just have, if you need to have rules, then have rules around things that matter. Then so the less rules you've got, the more guidelines, the more flexibility you've got, the less arguments you're going to have. And it's the same in your most intimate relationships as well. The less rules your script has about how it should be, the perfect relation should be, just sort of sit back and think, well, if I could choose, what would I choose? And then make a choice from there. And I think often you kind of have to close your eyes. This is what I do. I close my eyes and I drop down into my heart, and I try and get out of my head, because that's where the script lives. And I just close my eyes and ask, what would I choose? And that's how, many years ago I came to the very simple thing about the bedroom, really, with my son, was, well, obviously I choose just to love him. Doesn't matter what his room looks like, because one day he's going to leave home and that room's going to be empty, and it'll be clean and empty, and it's a bit sad, really. And we're at that stage now. He's at university, and I'm so glad that we stopped having arguments about his room when he was 13, 14, because that could have just spilled right up until the day he left, and it's fine. And you know what? He sent me a picture of his room at university, and it is immaculate. It was, honestly, he's got it. It looks low, and I just think, isn't that great? And I didn't point out that it was immaculate, because all I pointed out was I was really proud. Whereas again, what a lot of parents might do is say, "Oh, why wasn't your room like that at home?" But it's like, but actually, it's fine now. So that's all that matters. That's good, and it was lovely. And I thought, yeah. So actually, do you know what? He's good. He's good. He's getting what he needs now, isn't he? Whatever he needs for his room to be in the right place. But yeah, less rules, more flexibility, happy life.
Amazing. I think that sums it up really lovely. And thank you so much. I mean, I've learned so much just having this podcast with you, Darren. It's always amazing to talk with you, and you're a wealth of knowledge. And I'm sure our listeners will have got huge amounts of value, whether they're a parent or not. It can impact on any relationship. And I guess if anybody wants to get in contact with you, your book's out now on Amazon, and there'll be links in the show notes. And there's wonderful exercises in there. Like I said, I've read it myself. It's a fantastic book just to read for your own kind of insights. But also, I guess if you've got children, there's exercises in there as well to take you through, which are just wonderful. And if anybody wants to, get in contact with you and do any of your parent challenges, you're on Facebook, aren't you, Darren? If they type your name and the Awakened Parent Challenge, they'll be able to find you and connect with you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so, so much. So I'm Lisa Victoria. I'm your co-host from the UK across the pond. And until next time, I wish you all well. Take care.
Produced by Heard Not Seen Media. Visit imaginepodcasting.com for more information.